Hey there. Today we're going to start looking at different moral theories. These are moral frameworks to guide how we make good ethical choices and how we evaluate people's behavior and character. So we're going to look at different moral theories to try and get a grasp of right and wrong. Today we're going to start looking at a branch of theories called consequentialist theories. Got a few of those to take a peek at here. Let's do that. So basic idea of consequentialism, well, look at the root word consequences, right? What comes from the actions that are taken? We can judge a good thing if the consequences are good. We can judge a bad thing if the consequences are bad. Notice that we are not placing much emphasis on intent. The intention is not what matters, just the consequences. This is a pretty important idea, and that will differentiate these theories from other theories that we will look at. Proponents of these different schools of consequentialism will often argue that the ends justify the means. Good consequences may justify bad actions to get them. What we might say, you might do what could be perceived as an evil action in pursuit of a good outcome, a good end, good consequences. So, this is the basic idea. The first branch of consequentialist moral theory that we will look at is ethical egoism. Ethical egoism is the idea that I need to measure good and bad choices as the things that do good and bad things for me. Ego, of course, this root word referring to the self, right? So we want to pursue our own self-interest. If I've done a thing that makes me better off, then that thing is a morally good thing to do. So, ethical egoist scholars will point out that this is not selfishness. It's a little more nuanced than just base selfishness. It's self-interest. If you just lie, rob, cheat, steal, kill, do whatever you have to do to advance your, say, pocketbook, your monetary gain just a little bit, it may turn out that you are sacrificing relationships that would make you better off in the long run. So we might need to get a little more nuanced in what we mean when we're saying actions done in self-interest. It's more than just selfishness. You're doing something that is in your long-term best interest. It's not kind of radical hedonism where we're just going to pursue the actions that make us feel as much pleasure as possible. You won't see ethical egoist philosophers just, shooting up a bunch of crazy drugs to just feel as much of a head rush as they can. They will, they're not going to rob a bank just to get as much money as they can. There's a little more nuance to it than that, right? You want to consider the long-term consequences of your actions and choose the thing that is good for you. Because it's a good strategy, you're generally still going to cooperate. You're not just going to intentionally piss people off, right? We can divide ethical egoism into a couple different schools, and we'll see this division again and again in our consequentialist moral theories. Do we create our moral judgments based on specific actions, or do we do it by creating rules? So what do I mean by this? Say you're at work. You see the cash drawer, you're a cashier, you see the cash drawer pop open, and you know with certainty that they are not keeping good count of this money. I could take $100, just slide it in my pocket, literally nobody would know. Well, if you're following act egoism, you might say, well, there's a 0% risk that this would hurt me. I'm just going to get this $100. This is a morally acceptable action. I'm going to just stuff it in my pocket. Not a big deal. The rule ethical egoist would say, if I consistently engage in this behavior, over time, is this going to be a good thing? So rather than just one specific action, measuring the goodness or badness of that one specific action, the rule egoist will say, if I steal consistently over time, is that going to be good for me? Or is that going to be bad? So obviously the rule egoist would probably say, look, even though in this one specific case, you might not get caught, maybe there's no consequences for that, but if you practice this as a rule, you're going to hurt yourself in the long run. In the end, you're going to hurt yourself. So that's not maximizing your self-interest in the long run. So this difference between judging an action by that specific individual case versus creating general rules to guide us, general principles. Psychological egoism. So this is a theory that comes to us from social and biological sciences. And basically what it says is that all of our actions are inherently motivated by self-interest. The logic of it goes something like this. We evolved to preserve our life and pass on our genes. So we can't do anything, we can't pursue actions that go against that. We have to do the thing that preserves our life, makes us better off, and preserves our chance at passing on our genes. And if evolution and our biology is forcing us to do self-interested things, well, how can we be morally obligated to do things that are out of our own self-interest? If every cell in my body wants me to do things not that are good per se, but that are in my own best interest, how can some philosopher tell me, ignore your innate biological drives and do not what is good for you, but good for someone else? This is kind of the idea. This is a kind of evolutionary justification of this ethical egoist school of thought. You have to do what's in your self-interest because you're biologically programmed to do so. What do you guys think about this? Do you guys think people actually are bounded by their biological drives to do only things that benefit them, regardless of the consequences? Or is there a little more nuance to it? Are people willing to do things that don't advance their evolutionary interests? Maybe. The famous example of the firefighter running into the burning building? Is that making him better off? Maybe. Clearly there might be perhaps there's a hole in this. Maybe it's a little more complicated than just saying, look, our innate drives force us to do what is in our best interest, and it's really not possible to do selfless things. You're just doing it to make yourself better off. Anytime you see somebody, donating to the poor or volunteering to help other people, or even the firefighter rushing into the burning building, they're all just doing it in their own self-interest. Maybe. Might be a little more to it than that. And if we're going to, because we see people clearly do things that we might not think of as self-interest, right? Again, these examples, running into the burning building, donating to the poor, volunteering your time to people that need it. Well, the ethical egoist would say, since you're doing it, it must, because of this biological drive, it must be in your self-interest to do it. But at that point, if you define all human action from stealing to donating to, elderly widows, everything is self-interested. Both of these things are, because you can't do anything that's outside of your self-interest, because of that biological drive? Have we defined self-interest so broadly that it now means basically nothing? Perhaps. Perhaps. Lots to think about. So as we evaluate this first of our moral theories, ethical egoism, does this step on our principles of impartiality? Is it really impartial if the only person I'm considering is me? Of course, that's probably not impartial. That is explicitly biased towards yourself. Is this useful in moral problem solving? You're presented with this, you got the money in the till, do you take it out? Well, yeah. I mean, it may not lead you to a conclusion that others would agree with, but if you pursue ethical egoism, it will give you a way to solve your moral problems. What does this help me? You might take two different perspectives, the act egoist versus the rule egoist, but you might say, hey, does this single action further my self-interest? If yes, do it. If no, don't. Maybe that's helpful. Perhaps. It at least is going to give us a framework to decide whether an action is good or bad for ourselves. Maybe this isn't as helpful as some other theories, and maybe it's more helpful than some of the other moral theories that we'll look at. We'll put that on the back burner. Utilitarianism, a little more popular. This is a consequentialist theory that you probably have already heard of. So what is utilitarianism all about? Well, it comes to us from the philosophers John Stuart Mill and Jeremy Bentham. And really fabulous thinkers came up with a lot of great ideas. The basic idea of utilitarianism is that we want to maximize for society the good over the bad, the pleasure over the pain. So you are trying to take the net, add up all the benefits to all the people, and then subtract out all the harm and all the pain to people, and we're trying to make the net happiness of our society as great as possible. That's the basic idea of utilitarianism. It's often said simply the pursuit of the greatest good for the greatest number, meaning trying to make as many people as possible as well off as we can. And again, as I mentioned, we'll have two different types. We're going to divide this from act utilitarianism versus rule utilitarianism. Act utilitarianism, same idea. We're going to apply this. Is this specific action going to provide more net good than bad? If so, then do it. If not, don't. Versus rule utilitarianism. If we do actions like this over and over and over again over time, is this producing more good or more bad? So hopefully that distinction is clear. Again, are we creating rules that will broadly govern our moral decisions, or is it one specific act that we're diving in on? So let's think about this utilitarianism. Is it consistent with our moral judgments? If our only goal is to maximize total happiness minus total unhappiness, or to say we're trying to get as much pleasure minus pain, so our net overall benefit to society is as high as possible, what might you do to do that? What if there's one person who has caused a great deal of unhappiness in the world? If we could stop that person from doing that, say with the death penalty, yeah, we'll cause them a lot of unhappiness, but we're going to save all their future potential victims. Okay, well, maybe that's not a bad idea. Maybe the utilitarians would give us an argument for the death penalty, perhaps, depending on how you measure such things. Maybe because you're going to save all these great number of people from unhappiness by permitting this person to exist in society, we need to get rid of them. But what if we took that 2 steps further? What if it wasn't one person, it was a group of people? Say, a religious group, an ethnic group, the people that all live in one city. Oh, let's say, everybody else in Kentucky just, God, we hate Bowling Green. Those Bowling Green people, they're just the worst. Oh, so, yeah, they think they're so much better than us. They're always looking down on us. It would just be great if Bowling Green didn't exist. Well, if the net happiness that would be created from, destroying the city, raising the city, is greater than the net pain to the residents, wouldn't it be moral to do that? Obviously, there's questions about how we measure such things, but utilitarianism can clearly advocate for some pretty funny stuff on a societal level. What about on a personal level? Critics of act utilitarianism have pointed to the no rest problem. You're sitting at home. You've worked all day. You've put the kids to bed. All your stuff is done for the day. You're ready to hang out and play some video games. You're trying to decide, is it morally acceptable for me to just hang out, play some video games, and eat some snacks? But then you realize, is this causing the greatest good for the greatest number? Well, it's going to make me feel a little better. But if instead of spending that hour playing video games, what if I spent that hour at a soup kitchen, volunteering to help people? Well, that would produce more good for more number of people than just making me feel good for an hour. Oh, I got to do that. And then, okay, after that hour, I can go home and go to bed. Well, if you're just going to bed, is that really enough good to sacrifice the time you could spend volunteering? Or you could spend making money to donate to the poor? I hope you're starting to see, if you're following strict act utilitarianism, you can't ever stop. You got to be doing something to help somebody all the time, lest you're not making a moral action. That's quite a thing. So maybe these are a couple problems with utilitarianism. What do the modern utilitarians say? Well, they take this idea and they add a little bit to it. So they're going to add to classical utilitarianism, this idea of greatest good to greatest number, and they're going to add this idea of marginal utility. The word marginal we see all the time in the field of economics. Marginal, to put it very simply, means as we add a little more, or as we add one more. So, how much benefit do we get from one additional unit of aid? So let's say it like this. If we gave one additional dollar to the poorest person in the country, and we gave one additional dollar to the richest person in the country, if you're a classical utilitarian, you might say, well, you've increased their happiness by $1. Both of them. But obviously, we should say, well, that's not taking into account this idea of marginal utility. The benefit to that poor person getting that one additional dollar is much more than the benefit to the rich person getting one additional dollar, which they probably wouldn't even, that's not even going to land on their radar, right? If you're worth millions or billions, one additional dollar is I've heard it said, Elon Musk, it's not even worth his time to stoop to pick up a $10 bill because it's sacrificing his time. Man, maybe that's true, maybe not. You get this idea of marginal utility. So there you go. There's our look at consequentialist theories. Let's look at some other moral theories, yeah?